And we're live. Woo-hoo.
Welcome. Hi, Tim. Hi, Peter. Guess what? I am in the UK right now, so I am in a little bit different time frame than I usually am. But I'm consistent with you, Tim.
Yeah. It's like you're up north with the mysterious James. So his hand, we will see there. So today on the show we have Pieter Valk. I think it's Pieter Valk, isn't it? I think you're Pieter L. Is it Pieter L. Valk on social media? Because
yes,
are there lots of other Pieter Valks around? It's like.
Well, I'll be honest, it's mostly because someone had already bought the PIETERVALK.com URL. Yeah. So I had to find some way to get a different URL and then to make it consistent across all platforms. So that's why the L is there.
Yeah. So if we briefly recapitulate, I always like the word recapitulate, our discussion just before the show started about how would you describe yourself in terms of what you do. I had a stab of doing it down here, but you're not somebody who can be easily described in 3 words. So
sure,
maybe use like 10 or 15 or 20 or even 30 words to describe what you do and letting people know what this interview will be about.
Yeah, so I mean, I'd say in a sentence, I like to help churches love gay people better according to a traditional sexual ethic and help celibate Christians find family. And I do some writing and speaking around those topics. I'm a teacher and an aspiring deacon in the Anglican Church in North America. I've helped start an intentional Christian community for men committed to vocational singleness, and also I'm a licensed professional counselor here in the States. So I got my hands on lots of baskets.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have a couple questions.
Sure.
Why are your topics so important to both our UK audience and our American audience?
Yeah, so I mean, I think for people who are kind of believers, studies consistently show that while, maybe 4, 5, 10% of people in our churches are LGBTQ plus people, when you ask people who are not Christians or people who are not attending church anymore, kind of what is your biggest barrier to attending church, to giving Jesus a first chance or a second chance? Consistently what they share is their perception of Christians' treatment of gay people is the number one barrier to people getting to know Jesus, going back to church. So even if it's a small percentage of people who attend our churches, it has an outsized impact on kind of whether people feel like Jesus and the church has something good to offer them. And so I think that's why this topic matters. And that's particularly true in the States. And I suspect that there's similar stats, similar perceptions in faith spaces in the UK. But I'll leave that to you guys.
So let's wind back a bit. Why do you think that Christianity in general has such an issue with homosexuality? Do you think it's actually in the teachings of the Bible, or do you think it's the people at the time didn't like homosexuality and that's why it kind of grew out of that? What's your view on that historical perspective?
Yeah, so if you're asking a question of why is there so much division today, I think a great book is a book called Still Time to Love or Still Time to Care. I can't remember which one, but it's by a guy named Greg Johnson. And he outlines this whole trajectory in the US and the UK, starting with kind of before the AIDS crisis, with how John Stott and Francis Schaeffer and Billy Graham were speaking into how modern Christians should think about homosexuality and gay people and love them well. And then the AIDS crisis comes. And there's this great cry from a lot of gay Christians who are in the closet that they are afraid to die of AIDS and they want help, some kind of help. And the best solution that Christians, as they looked around quickly to try to find something to help these gay Christians, was unfortunately pray the gay away therapy, pray the ex-gay theology. But I think that we learned later caused a lot of harm. It overpromised, and it doubled people's risk of suicidality. So I think that started to create some division, some pretty serious pain. And then when I think the gay marriage issue was used particularly as a wedge political issue in the 2000s, particularly in politics in the US, but probably true for a season in the UK as well, that supercharged this conversation. And in the US today, particularly around trans issues, continuing to be used as a wedge issue and supercharging the division around that. So I think that's why there's a cultural division. Kind of why maybe are there differences theologically? You know, I do think that God, through the scriptures, understood by the church, read with the church, has a certain perspective on sexual ethics and what's best for all of our sexual stewardship. But I think much more of the division we perceive has to do with those cultural and political elements over the past decades than it has to do with what's in the scriptures. So, and I think the way we can see that is before all these political and cultural elements in the kind of 50s, 60s, 40s, we have John Stott, Francis Schaeffer, and Billy Graham speaking really with nuance and love into this topic. And we are on a good trajectory as a church to recognize that gay people exist, that gay people can't become straight, and they need to find a way to belong in our churches. We need to offer space for belonging in our churches. We're on a good trajectory. So the Bible and even kind of some of those parts of the church weren't the issue. The problem was how it just got culturally and politically supercharged, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Are you currently a therapist, Pieter?
Yeah, so I'm a licensed professional counselor, and I do that about a half day a week. Like, to be honest, God did not make me with the patience to be a therapist full time. But yeah, I primarily meet with clients who are gay and Christian and navigating questions of faith and sexuality.
Okay. Have you seen therapy change in recent years for the LGBT community?
I would say, 2 decades ago, it would be really hard to find a therapist that would offer you anything other than conversion therapy and pray the gay away therapy. And today, thankfully, that's changed significantly. In some ways, maybe flipped on its head. Today, it's hard to find a therapist who isn't pushing you toward a kind of progressive sexual ethic in the counseling space. But it is still possible to find therapists who say, hey, pray the gay away therapy doesn't work. I can't offer you that. But hey, if you, client, want to steward your sexuality according to a traditional sexual ethic, I can support you in evidence-based practices in trying to pursue that goal. But sometimes it's harder to find a counselor, at least here in the States, that can offer that.
Okay. How important is trauma therapy in what you do?
Super important. And so this comes up in my work as a therapist, but also my work doing some consulting with churches. The number one barrier to my clients thriving long-term, my clients who are gay and Christian and trying to steward that according to a traditional sexual ethic, are the lingering wounds of the closet. And that's a trauma experience. So on average, there's a 5-year gap between when a teen first realizes they experience same-sex attractions versus when they first tell a parent or pastor. And that is 5 years when they're alone making sense of their sexuality without the love and wisdom of their parents. And that often leads to anxiety, loneliness, depression, suicidality, unhealthy coping mechanisms, abandoning kind of the faith, or loss of life. And those things compound year after year after year. And after 5 years of that, 5 years of hiding, 5 years of believing shame messages, that's stuff that haunts people for the rest of their life.
Okay.
We have a comment from Jenny Hughes, a previous guest on the show, saying, "Pray the gay away stuff is so toxic. So please, there are people like Pieter in the space." Yeah, I'd never heard of that, to be honest. It's like that sounds very American to me, but it's probably a British thing as well, I guess.
And maybe Pieter, maybe for our UK guests, because there is a difference between American evangelical Christianity and kind of what the British understand, even in evangelical Christianity. Can you explain what Pray the Gay Away is or was?
Yeah, and if you're interested in kind of watching a cinematic portrayal of this, if you can get on kind of a US kind of Netflix account and watch Boy Erased, is a movie adaptation of a book about kind of those kind of experiences in the US. It's pretty typical. It's very powerful, very moving. But basically, kind of as the AIDS crisis was unfolding, there were some kind of more charismatic spaces in Christianity in the US that thought that through some mix of kind of Freudian psychology and kind of charismatic Christian practices, that one could pray the gay away, that one could remove someone's same-sex attractions, grow their opposite sex attractions, turn a gay person into a straight person. And there were a lot of incentives for people to self-report that they were experiencing change that maybe they weren't experiencing as robustly. There was a lot of pressure on leaders in these organizations to continue to say that they weren't experiencing same-sex attractions anymore, that they weren't gay anymore, even if they were feeling those things in private. And as you can imagine, that was just a closet of another kind, and led to lots of painful experiences. And the studies show that 96% of people who pursued those sexual orientation change efforts, which is the kind of clinical term, were unsuccessful in experiencing any change in their sexual orientation, probably unsurprising to most of the audience. And that 3 to 4% that did experience maybe some change probably has more to do with kind of just our natural sexual fluidity and flexibility than it has to do with kind of a miraculous orientation change. But those same studies showed that participation in those sexual orientation change efforts doubled participants' risks of suicidality. It's probably also not intuitively surprising to our audience, but there's data to back that up. And so, yeah, if ever a counseling client or a pastor comes to me and is kind of toying with this possibility of seeking or providing any kind of sexual orientation change efforts, I very strongly show them the scientific studies and say, this is not the way. This is not the way.
Yeah. All right. Well, we've got a load of comments about this. Saying it is a thing in the UK, but it's not called the same. And James, who seems to have now appeared around the corner, despite being in the same room as Chris, I say yes. Some of the Holy Spirit demon possession writing was on homosexuality during the sign of demon possession in the 1970s, 1990s. Anyway, before we get waylaid on Pray the Gay, the entire interview, let's talk about this modern monastery thing. Because that's kind of interesting. So, like, we've all got an idea. It's been a long time, well, certainly in the UK, because Henry VIII got rid of all the monasteries in the 16th century here, so we're not quite and I don't think the US has ever had any monasteries. So
not many.
First, describe what your idea of the old monasteries was, and then say what your new modern monastery is and why you kind of got into it. And do you live in a modern monastery? Is that what you would call it?
Yeah. So the answer to the last question is yes.
Yeah.
So the image that probably comes to people's mind is something from a movie with kind of a group of probably more rotund guys with shaved heads with just a ring of hair right here, who are in black robes and are drinking lots of beer and maybe praying with some people, or hiding in a cave, or secluded in a desert, or some of these kinds of like tropes. And that's not really the most common form of monasticism historically, but it's certainly the most cinematic portrayal of monasticism. I mean, long story short, I became convinced that what God was calling me to was the kind of singleness for the sake of kingdom work that's described in Matthew 19 and 1 Corinthians 7 in the scriptures by Jesus and Paul. But I didn't feel like I had some like magical gift of celibacy to where I didn't need any kind of human family anymore. And like all I needed to do was go into my prayer closet and then Jesus would meet all my intimacy needs. That was not me. That's some people. That's not me. So I went to my priest. I'm an Anglican. So I went to my Anglican priest and I asked him, how am I going to find family in the church among Christians? And I really was blessed by his answer. He was really honest and he said, I don't think you're going to find the kind of family you need in this church or any other church in the city that we're in anytime soon. We just don't do this well yet. But he said monasticism has been the most common way that celibate people have found family. Monasticism has been the greatest source of evangelism in the church historically. Monasticism has been the greatest source of theology in the church historically. Monasticism has been the greatest source of social justice in the church historically. So he said, I think you should start a kind of modern monastery in Nashville and find the family, build the family that you need among believers. Stay connected to our church, keep going to our church, and teach our church how to do this better. So that's essentially what we started doing 5 years ago. So we're called the Nashville Family of Brothers. We live in a house together, and we do we do family life together. We pray together in the mornings, and we do meals together, and we do holidays and vacations together. And we live under kind of a common rule of life, which isn't too different than your typical family. Every family has house rules. Some of them are unspoken. Some of them are more formal. We just had to make it more formal because there's, more than 2 adults in our house. Yeah. But yeah, we really see ourselves as a family. Like eventually, guys, we make increasing kind of commitments to our community. And our hope is eventually the guys would make lifetime commitments to this family. But we're still a part of our local churches. Like we don't, our home is not our church. We still have jobs outside of our house, right? So we're not all like in the house making beer and praying all day long or something, or making cheese, making bread. That sounds great, but that's not what we're doing. But we do believe that, like, as people call to vocational singleness is how we would describe it, that we're supposed to leverage our 9-to-5 job for the sake of the kingdom. So we do think that, like, because we don't have to worry about kind of the energy and costs associated with having a spouse and kids, that we should maybe use our 9-to-5 job in ways that are optimized for bringing forth the kingdom, bringing healing to our communities more quickly, in ways that maybe don't get paid as well, or maybe ways that are a little bit more stressful. So yeah, that's what we do.
Pieter, this sounds like something that many people would be interested in. Do you have offshoots or some kind of branches in other cities?
Yeah, so we've talked to a couple of people in other cities who are interested in starting something similar, and that's really my hope, is for this to be for people to take this model and tweak it and apply it in their context, and for there to be more intentional Christian community in lots of cities. We're a house of just guys, but we've been praying that there will be a similar house of women in our city. But in other contexts, maybe people would like to do a kind of a co-ed housing, or a mix between single and married people. So there's lots of different ways to do this, but I think we need intentional Christian community. I think a lot of believers find themselves lonely when they just live in this kind of single family home with multiple doors and miles, and disconnecting them from other people in their church and other believers.
So how many people are in your monastery in Nashville?
Yeah, so it's cozy right now. There are 6 of us in a kind of 3 2/3 bedroom house.
Oh, okay.
But this fall, we're going to have 3 or 4 more guys move into our community, and we're going to be moving out of this house we're in currently into kind of a larger space, so that guys can kind of have their own room if they want their own room. So yeah, it's small right now, but it's building.
Yeah. Do you do interviews? Do you have a waiting list? How do you choose who gets to be in your home?
Yeah, so we have a 12-month process that guys explore from outside of the house.
Okay.
Whether or not they're a good fit to move into the house. And it's both them figuring out if our community is a good fit for them, and us figuring out whether they're a good fit for us. And so during that 12-month process, they kind of read through our house rules. Essentially, they get to know guys in the house. They get to know each other. They meet with a pastor or a spiritual director to kind of think about these questions. And they make some kind of visits to our house to kind of for some trial periods, So yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, is it? Yeah, so I'm talking over Christelle for. Right, I'm sorry about that, but is it like you say vocational singleness? Does somebody have to be chaste? Chaste in your place, or is it that they just have to be single and not in a relationship with somebody? I mean, obviously, this comes down to the whole sexuality thing again.
Sure.
I mean,
Sure.
If somebody in your monastery started going out with somebody, would they be kicked out? I mean, how does that relationship part work?
Yeah, so part of our kind of house rules and part of the commitments that guys make before moving in, and as they kind of make longer commitments to being a part of this community, it is a commitment to the kind of abstinent singleness described in Matthew 19 and 1 Corinthians 7, which just by the text alone, it's mostly clear that what they're talking about is a permanent giving up of dating, romance, marriage, sex, for the sake of using the time and energy you would use for some of those things and raising kids to do other kingdom work that parents have a hard time finding struggle to find the time and energy to do. And that's also consistently been the understanding of those scriptures of the church. That's how the church is taught what those scriptures mean. So yes, it is, celibate singleness that we're doing. I mean, but that doesn't mean we're a bunch of kind of lonely, touch-starved people. There's a lot of rich emotional intimacy in our house. There's a lot of rich spiritual intimacy and intellectual intimacy, and there's a lot of hugs, and there's a lot of offering care in the form of healthy physical intimacy to each other. So as I get slightly older and as I'm doing life with some of my married friends who have kids, I'm increasingly realizing that what I'm finding in this family of brothers in terms of meeting my intimacy needs in healthy ways is not really that different than what my married friends who've been married for a decade and have a couple kids, what their intimacy looks like. So
James said a comment, and it says there's a small but growing new how do you say this? Monasticism? There you go. Movements in the UK. Mm-hmm. And I agreed with how that placed the catalyst for theology. Oh my word, James, you and your big words. Ian J. Mosby is one such organizer in the UK.
You probably want to discourage James from getting too much into monasticism.
Yes.
Before you get married, anyway. Maybe afterwards you could start one. But
I find that fascinating because James does have an Anglican background. So this is interesting on both sides of the pond.
Yeah.
So, are you training other houses, Peter, to be like yours?
Yeah, so we're doing a kind of informal kind of coaching, mentoring some houses in other cities that are interested in starting something similar. But our hope is that, we're still young in this, like 5 years old is not that old. So we hope in the next 5 years, 10 years, we really can discover the secret sauce for this. And then we can share that with other communities who want to make something similar and really share with them in confidence. We've tried lots of different things. Here's what's worked for us. Here's what we would recommend.
Peter, you've written some things. Where can people find some of your writings?
Yeah, so the easiest place would be to go to PieterLValk.com. So it's a Dutch spelling. So PIETERL, V as in Victor, ALK.com. And there's a publications tab there where you can check out some of the things I've written. One of the things I'm really proud of is I got to write an article for Christianity Today about this vocational singleness. What is it? Where is it in scripture? How could our churches do this better? In particular, how could we discern? How could we invite Christian young adults to really seriously consider both vocational singleness and Christian marriage as a possibility for themselves? So if you also Google Christianity Today, Pieter Valk, or vocational singleness Christianity Today, that article will come up. And then if any of you guys are on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, and that's where kind of you like to engage with content, you can find me on any of those platforms. The same handle, Pieter L. Valk. So PIETERLVALK. So yeah, would love to continue conversation. Would love for you all to see more of kind of there's lots of video content out there. There's publications and different through different kind of online kind of journals and magazines. And there's some just kind of personal reflections as well about my story. I mean, I guess I'm burying the lead here, but I mean, a reason why I care about all these things is that I'm gay and I'm a Christian and I'm committed to a traditional sexual ethic, and I believe the way God is inviting me to steward that is vocational singleness. And so don't be surprised that a good amount of my content is talking about that part of my story too. So
this message is so important for the evangelical church here in America today. And I want to ask one final question before Tim takes it away from me.
Sure.
I was going to ask another question. Yeah.
What is your primary message to the American evangelical church for the LGBTQIA community?
Yeah. So I think for kind of particularly conservative evangelicals in the US, for a long time, they hoped that, and I think with compassion, they hoped this, that pray the gay away would fix their gay problem. They would just turn their gay people straight, and then that's what would kind of help. That's what would attend to the challenges, the pain that gay people who are Christians were saying they were experiencing. That I think we need to accept that is not the solution. That there are going to be people in our church, in our evangelical churches, who have enduring same-sex attractions, who love Jesus and want to find a way to follow his teachings in ways that brings goodness and beauty to their life. And what I would ask that conservative kind of evangelical Christian is, how is that kind of person going to find goodness and beauty in your church? Do you have any concept for that? And I think the first step is accepting the fact that people are going to have enduring same-sex attractions, and so just getting them opposite sex married and putting them in that pipeline is not a solution. I think the key solution is actually taking seriously what Jesus and Paul had to say in Scripture about singleness for the sake of the kingdom, and our conservative evangelical churches being places that not only teach what's actually in Scripture about it, but take practical steps to embody it, to actually become churches where we, instead of seeing singleness and celibate singleness as a liability for church leadership, we see it as an asset. Instead of idolizing romance and kids, we value marriage and kids, but we also value celibacy and doing other kinds of kingdom work. I think we've got to take seriously our churches being places that cultivate intentional Christian community, where celibate people can find family, but also that's going to help out the married people in our churches. I mean, I'm connected to a lot of people who go to conservative evangelical churches who are married, and they feel lonely. They're looking for a richer experience of community. So I could go on and on and on, but that's what I would have to say to kind of conservative evangelical Christians in the US.
Okay. Well, Christelle basically asked the question I was going to ask.
Okay.
So, well, more or less in a different way. I was going to say, what did you want to change about the US church? So
yeah,
I'm going to ask you a totally offbeat question. I'll ask a few people, but if you had to describe yourself using 3 animals, what 3 animals would you pick?
Oh, okay. So there was definitely a phase when I was in college that people were, and I'm sure this happens in waves, every couple decades, but where everyone was trying to identify what their spirit animal was.
Okay.
So I, at the time, always went back and forth between a fox and a mongoose.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So
what about
maybe not
a third animal. What about a third animal, though?
A third animal.
Even though a fox and a mongoose is a bit of an odd combination.
You haven't had that one yet, I don't think, Tim.
No.
This is
gosh, what would I think I can have some squirrel tendencies sometimes as well.
Yeah,
I'm pretty high energy. So I'll say fox, mongoose, squirrel.
Yeah. I did have a more controversial question that I was going to ask, but I don't think I will, because we don't want to get kicked off YouTube.
That's fair.
Pieter,
Yeah.
Are people able to hire you as a therapist outside of Nashville, or are you only practicing in Nashville? Can people go on Zoom and hire you? How does this work? If someone wants
so I meet with clients pretty exclusively virtually, starting at the beginning of the pandemic, and then I've just kind of continued that practice because most of my clients, I think almost all of my clients right now are outside of the state of Tennessee. So if you're in the US, I can offer you licensed professional counseling virtually anywhere in the US. And then if you're outside of the US and you want to have some conversations about this, I cannot practice, professional counseling as kind of licensed and understood in the state of Tennessee in the US outside of this country. But I can offer kind of something more like life coaching or psychotherapy. That may sound like kind of technical legal language, but I just need to make clear that I can't provide professional counseling outside of the US. But yeah, if people, that website I offered earlier, peterlvalk.com, you can also learn more about my counseling services. You can learn about kind of, I speak at conferences, at churches, for campus ministries and different Christian spaces. And so you can get a sense of the kind of topics I speak on, and there's even some video samples there. There's some of my personal testimony on kind of the about page of that website. So there's a lot there. You know, if you heard something that I said today and it irritated you or made you curious or you found delight in it, you can find more of the same on my website.
Okay. Well, it was great to have you on the show today. I think we've just about done. Thanks for all the people who commented. Thanks to Christelle for being here. Thanks to Pieter for being here. And I'm going to play the outro now and hopefully not screw it up.
Thanks, Peter. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Yeah.
This is terrifying for me.
I've made more money in the last 3 years than I did in the previous 7.